offline on a particular day with the right set of circumstances at the right time. So why is chemical management important? Well, number one, because if we plan this well, you can have a better response from your organisation than might be otherwise. So I'm going to really quickly now talk on the chemical management planning cycle and what I think should occur in your process. I want to start here on the left-hand side by saying it's really poignant and good time right now to do a review of your chemical risk assessments. This might go in line with your emergency management planning requirements, but a chemical risk assessment that details the risks associated with each chemical that you hold, the potential reagents that can occur with each of those chemicals that you hold, and then goes into outlining the storage requirements and other requirements that you may need to control those chemical situation. Secondly, it's a good time of year now to get to review your PPE, the alarms and equipment that is in place to monitor this situation. So for us at Aquapulse, what that meant was getting an understanding of if the air handling system goes off in a certain circumstances, when the slide's running, you can have this chloramine build up within the slide tower. And so we needed to know immediately if the air handling system then switched off. So we were introducing new systems through our building management system there to understand that. But this also goes to ensuring that your CO2 alarms are serviced, ensuring that if you've got automatic dosing systems, as is what was blamed at the Apollo Bay site, that if there is a leak detected in that system, that those systems automatically shut off, or that there is the ability for your plant managers and your duty managers to turn them off automatically. Likewise, it's important that if your circulation system turns off, that your dosing pumps don't keep dosing, as is what was blamed in the Hurstville situation. I believe the situation there was along the lines of pool not operating, but the hydrochloric acid auto dosing system continued to pump. And etc. Also going into your planning cycle from a chemical perspective is this review of your emergency management plan. It's fundamentally important that your emergency planning committee has an idea and has somebody sitting on their on that panel that has an understanding of the chemicals that you hold on site, what they're used for, what the potential reagents are, or reactive solutions are, and the dangers associated with the chemicals that you're holding there. It's also an opportunity now in the off season to have your emergency management services actually do a walkthrough of site. And particularly we heard this at the regional conference last week, where Kelly Smart of East Gippsland was talking about the CFA coming in advance of the fire front to actually understand what chemicals were held on site so that they could react to the situation. At Aquapulse, we were particularly lucky. We had the CFA in the next building across the road, and so wherever we had an emergency or our alarm go off on site, we'd walk to the front door and have a look and see how quick their response was. But we had a good relationship with them. They were in with us having a chat on a regular basis. They come through and have a look at our what we were holding in terms of quantities of chemicals, and getting an understanding of what their firefighting plan would be if the plant room was to catch fire, or if we had other emergencies such as CO2 leaks and the like. It's important now to actually look at your colour coding and the dangerous good regs. And from this colour coding, I'm talking what is in what pipe and where is it going and what direction is it getting pumped in, so you can get an understanding before you start touching a leaky pipe of actually that could be chlorine. and or CO2 or whatever other chemicals that you're pumping. It's important to ensure that your dosing points are actually correctly highlighted and coded with those color codes as well. Not just because it's information that we need to know, but if emergency services are rocking up at your facility, they want to know what's getting pumped into what and potentially follow a line back to isolate and shut off valves. Because you might not be the one that's able to actually go in there and do it. Also important to get an idea of the dangerous goods regs and what quantities of chemicals you can hold and what you are holding on site. Also in this plan phase, ensure your regular servicing is occurring. And make sure you get all your plant systems looked at on a regular basis. A monthly service or a regular service is better than none, and it's far better to be proactively managing anything that's automated in the chemical space than it is to be reacting to a leak, which if, as you saw in that video, a hydrochloric acid leak caused a full evacuation, national news, and all of the firefighting effort that goes along with that, plus the damaged reputation. And finally, in your prepare phase, it's important for team training and making sure your team are adequately trained in all the possible occurrences that you highlighted in your risk assessment, that you highlighted in understanding your storage requirements, that they understand the PPE and the alarm equipment and how to shut things off, that they understand what the emergency management plan is in relation to chemical management, and that they also have a thorough understanding of whether they can or how to direct emergency services personnel that are going to be turning up, whether they need to direct them to a certain location within the building where shut-off valves are, and all of the rest of this, because in an emergency situation, you're not going to have time, or they're not going to have time to give you a call and speak to your operations person. And then it's also important to practice chemical-related emergencies. So that you're well prepared for the eventual emergency situation. Finally, on at least an annual basis, it's worth having a management review of all of the above. So this is a standard emergency management planning cycle that you might see in relation to other things. But in a management review, it's important to collate all the incidents that may be related to chemicals or similar, and get a real understanding such that you can revisit your risk assessment, you can revisit your emergency planning committee with relevant information on at least an annual basis. And that's the best way to cover off your situation. Next, I'm just going to say chemical housekeeping. And at Lifesaving Victoria, we have this opportunity every so often to go and visit sites in and around Victoria and some across Australia to have a look at how well they're managing their chemicals through the process of our pool safety assessment. So I just wanted to highlight, and I'm not going to name or shame anybody here, and I actually think I stole this from somewhere else and it's not a Victorian situation, but obviously some clear hazards in this photo, including multiple chemicals stacked upon each other, workspaces not tidy, you've got a phone in the middle here, someone's drink bottle, and over the back, some type of equipment panel. But I also wanted to highlight one that you might think looks relatively neat, but from our perspective and from your own, could see some improvements as well. This is a fairly standard plant room from what we see. One of the interesting bits here is that we've got a co-location of the air handling system above the plant. So there is a view to say that this type of plant room would actually require some type of shut off if there was any type of emergency chemical incident in there. From a pipes marking perspective, some of these pipes are marked up the top top here, but some are not. And it's important for emergency services, amongst others, that even when they arrive at sites, they're able to identify what's in what pipe and what valves they potentially need to shut off in order to stop a chemical incident from continuing. The bunding here is quite good in this photo. You've got regular chemical bunds that can sustain 110% of the capacity of the container that's sitting in it. That's what we're always looking for. And we've actually got a fairly neat and tidy space that you can work in, except maybe for the PPE storage, which is a bit lacking. So if someone was trying to access this ladder up into the upper plant there, it's obviously not a good idea to have the PPE hanging over the ladder that may be required to get up there. So I just ask, it's now the off season, many of us will be cooling down post a busy summer period. It's time to get out there and have a look at what's going on. So let me just reiterate those again. What can you do now? Review the end of season chemical storage requirements. Decide what you want to keep, decide what you don't want to keep. Call your chemical supplier and see if they will take some back. You never know, they may actually do this. I know we always used to get a refund for our empty poly boys from our particular chemical supplier. But if you're oversupplied and there's no reason to keep it there, it's actually a hazard just sitting there waiting to happen. So understand your end of season chemical storage requirements and prepare for winter storage requirements. So it actually might mean that we're doing the opposite at our indoor pools. We might be stocking up a little bit. You're more likely potentially to have those fecal incidents in the next couple of months as swimming lessons start to intensify again. So maybe preparing for those superchlorinations that are ready to come. Review risk assessments of procedures and labelling. Labelling is notoriously fickle in our industry. It tends to be stuck to a wall with a piece of sticky tape, and in a hot, humid environment that is our plant rooms, they often get smudged, taken off the wall, or actually even moved around. So have a look at those. Your procedures are vitally important here, but it's also important to ensure that team members are adequately trained in these. And in the risk assessment process, as we always advocate for, there needs to be a consultation with your key personnel. Conduct, and I implore you to do this, contact your emergency services, your local emergency services, but also potentially your municipal emergency management people at the council. So this is a council-wide MEM. And get them to have a tour of your facility. I've no doubt that they won't know what is there until the day that they're actually coming to an emergency, unless you give them the opportunity to come and have a look and have that discussion with them around, hey, what's the best management for this this chemical? Were we to have an incident in this, you know, is it best to store here or there? We're obviously, as industry professionals, the expert in correct storage, but get their point of view as well. There's some really specific Australian standards out there that they might be able to point out. But the other thing that they're going to be looking for is whether or not your signage complies with what chemicals are there. One of the first things that a fire is going to want to know is whether they need to be in breathing apparatus or not, whether they can use water on the chemical or not. So that signage being up to date is vitally important. Review training for key staff right now. So cleaners, duty managers, and frontline staff are vitally important for chemical management as well. They need to understand what they're using, why they're using it, and in what proportions it needs to be used. We heard from WorkSafe last week at the ARV regional conference about specific organisations that were failing to induct their staff in the proper use of disinfectant. And WorkSafe are prosecuting some facilities, or some, not necessarily aquatic facilities, but some businesses out there that have failed to implement their COVID safe procedures correctly. I'm going to reiterate that. Review chemicals in alignment with your COVID safe plan. So if you brought new disinfectant into the facility into your facility in the last 18 months, it's important that that's actually marked down on all of your procedures and that there's relevant procedures in line with using those chemicals. Disinfectant does require watering down or diluting in some circumstances, and failing to do so in accordance with manufacturer's instructions can cause potential hazard for your frontline staff, but also in its effect of disinfecting surfaces. So I implore you to have a look at that. And finally, I'm going to do a bit of a plug here, but in line with the Victorian Water Guidelines for Public Aquatic Facilities 2020, there is a requirement for members on your site to have aquatic technical operator training, and some of this chemical training is covered off in that course. It is something that that we're checking in our pool safety audits at the moment. There's some very relevant training in there, and so please have a look at that course in due course. I'm quickly going to have a look at chemicals in the GSPO and the environment that we work in, and we're coming out and auditing you in. I didn't realise this had all these little clicks in it, so apologies. What we look for when we come out to your site is, do you have an appropriate emergency management plan? And we recommend that there is an appropriate process to manage the gas leak or a chemical spill, water contamination and medical emergency. And if you looked at that video at the start of the presentation and you consider, does our gas leak emergency or does our chemical spill emergency trigger our media response? The answer is it can. And so potentially you need to go back and inform your crisis management team or your media team or someone of the like about what a chemical incident could look like in your facilities and what type of thing they potentially need to be prepared for, and decide who's going to be informing who in those situations. Likewise, water contamination is one that we're always looking for, and of course medical emergency to help deal with people that could potentially have chemical burns or the like. I'm not going to refer to the references as I go through this, but yes, they are there. We're also looking for, is the plant and chemical area secure? And so the specific wording we're looking for is recommended that access to plant and chemical areas is restricted to staff and other authorised persons only. Recommended that a staff only or restricted signage is displayed. There's your reference. That's what we're looking for when we come to site. And the picture on the side here is a plant room that we went out to. I think it's actually got electrical hazards in it, but nothing saying that that authorised people only were allowed in here. LSV obviously tends to advocate for this combined sign, which is a HAZChem, PPE, plant room non-smoking and your dangerous goods signage all in one. And it can be done in a really simple and neat way as this one shows. Sorry, that's going to come up again. Is appropriate signage displayed within your facility, and is additional information displayed for hazardous substances? So in your signage, if you have hazardous substances, there needs to be adequate additional information around what's said there. And I apologise that the picture is quite small, but there is information around the PPE that's required. There's UN numbers, there's non-conforming chemicals that can't be stored next to each other. And in this specific example, which I think is MSAC, Jamie's giving me a nod, I think there's also a procedure in place above this situation. Again, references actually comes from the National Transport Commission for Dangerous Goods. It's reiterated in guidelines for safe pool operation, and this is aquatic signage, section 13. Right, let's keep going. Are dry chemicals appropriately stored? Are hazardous substances appropriately located away from one another? So we're obviously looking for barriers. We're looking for bunding. We're looking for containers that are sealed and clean and neat. I won't keep boring you with that. We're also looking for, is appropriate hazardous substances register available? Is an appropriate dangerous goods manifest available? So these are key documents that you're actually going to need to provide to emergency services personnel when they arrive at your facility. It's not necessarily great to have that that filed away on a computer program somewhere where somebody can't actually physically hand it over to the dangerous goods or the expert that rocks up, or the chief of fire, or in our case, as it was at Aquapulse, it's actually the chief of the local chief of the ambulance service, so the ambulance service that came in as the area commander and was running all those items. They then hand it to their chemical experts and they get an understanding of what's there. But if you can't provide this information in a timely manner, it's going to hold up the response that you're able to get. Important to have, absolutely, from your own perspective as well. But in the event of an emergency, you need that there. And I don't know which site this is from. Is there appropriate PPE provided? And is the signage in place reflecting the available PPE? So it's all very well to have PPE in a cupboard and or containers as these sites have, but we need to understand what's there, what it's used for and why, and what people can look for. And one of the examples that we've seen recently through COVID is individualised PPE per staff member. So it's no longer acceptable for people necessarily to share breathing apparatus or gas masks or the like. It's likewise no longer acceptable for people to share clothing without also wiping these down, and that's covered off in the special guideline for safe pool operation, which covers off the COVID-19 response. So have a look at that as well. Whilst we advocate for PPE, hanging it off a hook, etc., it needs to be professionally and correctly stored to ensure its longevity and that it actually is there to protect people from the chemicals they're dealing with as the last line of defence. We're also on site looking for chemical spills and leak kits. And just a note on this type of situation, where chemicals stored behind the chemical kit, and the chemical kit kind of isn't ready for use. So it's important to make sure that your chemical kits are up to date and ready for use at the moment. And you can see the standards there that I'm referencing. Finally, and I was talking to this earlier, chemical lines and pipes are clearly labelled, and that the correct colours are used in chemical lines, pipes and injectors. This is the magenta colour for your chlorines and your oxidizers, and it's a beige colour for your CO2 and the like. This plant room here looks terribly complicated, but what might be missed is your chemical injection points and the like. And it's not you that's going to necessarily be there to point these out to emergency services personnel who are turning up for your chemical incident. So having these highlighted well will help you manage that potential chemical emergency. And here's a perfect example here where we've got a leaking injector point. We have no idea what the substance is except for us that potentially work in this industry. That looks likely to be chlorine, and the one above it, who knows. But terribly important information for somebody that's turning up at your site that needs to know what to turn off and why, or potentially to run back a pipe to see what is actually leaking to understand a leak situation. Right. So just to reiterate again, a chemical risk assessment, ongoing storage requirements, PPE alarms and equipment, your emergency management plan, your emergency services walkthrough, your colour codes and your dangerous goods regs. Think about regular servicing. Think about training your team. And this is all stuff that can be achieved in the next 6 months. So that's the homework I'm setting you as the aquatic industry at this point. I've got a short amount of time here for questions. And I'm wary that there's 2 people in the room here with me. If anyone's got any questions, shout it out now. If not, this was my only presentation for this section today. We're set to finish at 12, so just before 12. that's where we're currently at. Any questions at this point?
From Hawaii said that they don't have any response to the work safety alert that was released, and surprised that was actually work safety.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to provide.
So Kate, what was the specifics of the alert? Because I'm not familiar with it off the top of my head. What we might do, Kate, is actually take this one on notice, and I'll have a look at what the alert was and come back to you. But I've got WorkSafe in my meeting schedule this week.
Cool. Thanks, Alec.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending the AFAR, the Aquatic Fitness and Recreation PD session. In particular, I want to thank Mandy Knowlton, Dr. John Tower, Marty Moran, and Ramsey from Lifesaving Victoria for joining us for our panel. I think it's been a worthwhile event. I just want to plug again, we've got our masterclass that starts this afternoon. It is an in-person session. If you're interested in getting involved in the next one, it runs concurrently with our Aquatic Fitness and Recreation, or our AFAR session. Our next session, Adrian, correct me, is it due in August? Do you know the specific date yet? We don't. So it'll be the second Tuesday of August. We look forward to seeing you then. We do put on a good spread here at Lifesaving Victoria. We are encouraging you to come and be in the room. We're fine with the idea that that people want to sit at home. So please continue to do that as well. We're about to break for lunch, but just signing off from me. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.